Hi everyone! In this video, you will learn how to tell the time. Let's start. Look at the clock below. What can you see on it? Okay, we can see numbers 1 to 12. We can also see the hands of the clock. We have the short hand and the long hand. The short hand of the clock tells us the hour, while the long hand of the clock tells us the minute. How many minutes are there on a clock face? Let's keep count by 5, starting with number 1. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60. So there are 60 minutes. Let's look at this clock. The short hand is pointing at 12. So it means that the hour is 12. And the long hand is pointing at 12 also. But we are not going to write 12. Instead, we read it as o'clock. So the time is 12 o'clock. Let's have another one. The short hand of this clock is pointing at 10. So we'll write 10. While the long hand of this clock is pointing at 12. So the time is 10 o'clock. Another example. The short hand of this clock is pointing at 8, while the long hand of this clock is pointing at 12, so the time is 8 o'clock. This time, the short hand of this clock is pointing at 1, and the long hand of this clock is pointing at 12, so the time is 1 o'clock. How about here? The short hand is pointing at 3, and the long hand is pointing at 12, so it's 3 o'clock. How about this one? The short hand is pointing between 5 and 6. Okay, don't get confused if you see the arrow pointing between two numbers. This happens because as the long hand moves around the clock, so does the short hand. So is the short hand pointing to 5 or 6? Okay, always read the number that comes first on the clock. So the short hand actually reads 5. Now let's read. What time is it on the clock? The short hand is pointing at 5, while the long hand is pointing at 6. Okay, so we need to skip count by 5. So let's start. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. So the time is 5:30. Another one. The short hand is pointing at 10, while the long hand is pointing at 9. So we need to skip count by 5s again. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. So the time on the clock is 10:45. Next. The short hand is pointing at 8, while the long hand is pointing at 1. So we need to skip count by 5. So the time is 8:05. Another one. The short hand of this clock is pointing at 3, and the long hand is pointing at 7. So in order for us to know how many minutes, we need to skip count by 5s. Let's start. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. So the time is 3:35. Okay, how about this? The short hand is pointing at 11, and the long hand is pointing at 3. So let's skip count by 5s again. 5, 10, 15. So the time is 11:15. Okay, let's look at this. Study the given clock. Choose the correct time. What time can you see on the clock? Is it 12:30, 6:12, or 6 o'clock? Okay, it's 6 o'clock. Another one. What time can you see on the clock? Correct, it's 12 o'clock. How about this? What time can you see on the clock? Okay, so it is 2:30. Another one. What time? Correct. It's 12:30. Okay, let's look at this word problem. You need to meet with your friend at exactly 5 o'clock. When you arrive at your meeting place, you see this clock. Are you early or late? Okay, you are late. Why? Because the clock says 5:30 and 5:30 comes after 5 o'clock. Next, you need to meet with your friend at exactly 5 o'clock. When you arrive at your meeting place, you see this clock. Now, are you early or late? Okay, you are early. Why? Because the clock says 4 o'clock and 4 o'clock comes before 5 o'clock.